If you're over 30, you will never be as good at video games as you once were in those prime teenage years. Or if you ask the internet, that's what everyone's probably gonna say. You just don't have the same reaction time anymore. Kids these days are just too good. Why am I coming home after a long shift at work just to get absolutely cooked by someone who needs their parents' permission to see a PG-13 movie?
Yes!
Attackers win.
There's even a ton of videos on TikTok discussing this exact same phenomenon. POV, it's 2024 and you're being beat by kids on games when you just want to relax after a long day at work. The comment section feels the same way. Got there quicker than I thought. Time flies, man. Reaction time isn't there. Too tired. Really, I just play solo games now. It's the circle of life, my friend. But is it really? I mean, do we simply just get worse at games as we get older? Or maybe it's because the skill ceiling on competitive online multiplayer games is just so much higher nowadays. We know that as we age, things like reaction time, eyesight, and mental stamina begin to decline.
Right now, holy shit, I'm so slow.
But does that really offset the years of sweaty COD lobbies that we endured to get better? Does getting older make you worse at games? If so, there has to be some science behind it, right? And I went to find out exactly that. And the answer isn't nearly as straightforward as you might think. For context, I grew up in the glory days of Call of Duty Black Ops 2. My main enjoyment was using a sniper to go for ridiculous clips to be used in montage videos. Things like killing 3 separate people with 1 bullet, hitting 5 enemies in a row, or getting 4 headshots into the kill feed before anyone else could. Now, I was never the best at this. At the time, a young FaZe clan was starting to really hit its stride into the mainstream. They had a roster stacked with the most incredible players you had ever seen. These guys were the top 1% of the top 1%. But still, I was good, really good, especially compared to the general population of the game. Fast forward a bit through the remainder of high school, college, and then my first couple of jobs. I hadn't played much of any COD game since the end of high school, but I often thought back about the fun times I had playing and how good I was. Or at least how good I thought I was. Boom, the Black Ops 6 beta drops. Dude, I've got to try this one out. I'll probably dominate lobbies just like I used to. I could not have been more wrong. It was a complete carnage of my pride and dignity. It felt like getting digitally jumped by a pack of brolic, bloodthirsty, slide-canceling 12-year-olds. There were so many new mechanics and movement metas, it was a completely different pace of gameplay. Have I really fallen off that badly? I mean, yeah, I probably need to warm up a bit and learn some new tricks, but it's just like riding a bike, right? Absolutely not. Each game went just as poorly as the one before it. I was lucky to break 30 kills per lobby, and as I was getting more and more frustrated with my failing ability to keep up, the thoughts started creeping in. Dude, I'm completely washed. Stop wasting your time on this. You're terrible. There's no point in even playing if I'm not that good anymore. What could be causing this tremendous shift in gameplay ability? I had to know. My first thought was, there's got to be a decline in my own cognitive function. Slower reaction times, worse eyesight and game sense, less mental stamina, and slower information processing.
I can't fucking compete!
In 2017, there was a very interesting experiment that sheds a lot of light on this. Conducted by the Institute of Forensic Engineering from a university in the Czech Republic, the goal was to understand how children's reaction times develop as they grow. They ran experiments on and compared groups of children from ages 3 to 18 years against adults ages 20 to 30 years, which is almost exactly the range that most of the online gaming community have claimed to see such a cognitive decline. The main task involved pressing a mouse button when a specific color, in this case red, appeared on the screen among several changing colors. To keep things unpredictable, the order and timing of the color changes were random. Each child was tested alone in a quiet room and had to perform at least 5 reactions. The study measured 3 different types of reaction time: visual, seeing the signal; mental, thinking about it; and physical, moving the hand. In the first experiment, only the mental reaction time was measured by keeping the screen straight in front of the child to eliminate the visual reaction time. In the second experiment, both mental and visual reaction times were measured using 2 screens at an angle. To make it easier for younger kids, the angle was set at 45 degrees instead of 90 degrees. Finally, the third experiment looked at all 3 types of reaction time together, focusing on how quickly the children could react using their hands. But weirdly enough, the results were not at all what you might expect. Different parts of how quickly children react change as they grow older. For example, kids aged 6 to 7 and those aged 8 to 9 showed differences in their reaction times, but when looking specifically at how fast they physically moved, there wasn't a noticeable difference between those two age groups. However, in the second measurement, which also included visual reaction time, there were more significant differences between these age groups. Makes enough sense. I think the most obvious differences are going to be between the mid to late teenagers and the 20-somethings anyways. The main findings of the study are that there have been no significant differences between 15 to 18 and 20 to 30 age groups. What? It also showed that children took longer to react than adults and that their reaction times varied more widely. This suggests that children might not be as focused as adults, which is important to consider when looking at the data. Wait, so teenagers and 20-somethings reaction times are the same? And it even suggests that the 20 to 30 year demographic has better concentration overall. Right, well then why do I still feel so slow against other players? A second experiment from the Journal of Neurophysiology could give more insight. They claimed that age-related increases in reaction time result from slower preparation and not a delayed initiation. This basically means that as we get older, we become more cautious and spend more time thinking about the right move. Most people would think that we get slower because of bad reflexes, which is not the case. A really good example of this is pro player highlights, where they secretly spot an enemy. Instead of immediately blasting them away, they have what's known as trigger discipline. A younger player might not think that far ahead and just hyper-focus on getting that one kill, but a more seasoned player waits to gather more information about where the other enemy players are before starting the fight. This is what they mean by slower preparation and not a delayed initiation. And while in this study their test subject groups focused more on 20 to 80-year-olds, it could still be helpful in finding some answers. To conduct their tests, they built a glass table with a screen underneath it. The screen would randomly display a circle target in one of 8 spots, and each subject would sit right next to the table, and as soon as the target popped up, they used their hands to move a cursor towards the target. Here's what they found. The slower responses seen in older adults are due to a decline in their ability to process information and prepare for movements, rather than being due to indecision or hesitancy. So, just like we said before, the older you get, the slower you become at understanding the situation and deciding on the right move. The researchers emphasize that this delay in movement initiation remains constant as people age, suggesting a consistent pattern in how aging affects motor skills. That only affects the older adults, the ones nearing 70 and 80 years, not the 20-somethings who still play video games. So sure, I guess there's a slight change in information processing and delayed reaction time as you grow from your teens to your 20s, but it's minimal at best. So our reaction times haven't changed at all, our information processing capabilities are relatively the same, and we have arguably better concentration abilities. If that's really the case, then why are nearly all top-level professional gamers so young? I mean, if it isn't our reaction time, then you'd figure experience would give you the best competitive edge, right? So it must be something to do with our worsening eyesight or the loss in mental stamina. I mean, if we weren't actually getting worse as we age into our 20s and beyond, then wouldn't there be a lot more top pro players over the age of, say, 25? Think about it. In nearly all traditional professional sports, an athlete spends his childhood and adolescence learning and improving at the game. Then he or she gets drafted into the pros at around 18 to 21 years old. They spend what is widely considered to be their prime years competing at the top level throughout their 20s. Typically, they'll see their greatest achievements during the middle to late arcs of that professional career. And then after that, they start their physical decline in their post-prime at 30 years and beyond. Usually because they can't really compete as effectively against the newest batch of 20-year-olds that are fresh to the leagues. The NBA's average player age is 26, and even in the super demanding NFL, the average player retires between the age of 26 and 27. Yet, if you take a look at the professional esports scene of any major game title, the professionals aren't just on the younger side. They're often starting their professional careers in the early to middle of their teenage years. Winners of the 2024 Global Fortnite Championship, a 17-year-old Peterbot and a 16-year-old Poyo. Average ages of the top professionals in the Rocket League World Series, 20 years old. And the youngest team average, Team Falcons, is just under 18 years old. One of the most popular professional Valorant players, Tens, who just retired at the ripe old age of 23 years, ending a notable professional career that began just 15 years after being born. Even still, medical professionals in the gaming and esports industry agree to the previous research that we discussed, that it's not a result of any cognitive decline. McGee is a physical therapist and co-owner of 1HP, a group of medical professionals who specialize in treating esports competitors. Yes, there is research that shows us how reaction time changes over time, and one of the things that affects reaction time eventually is age. However, that age at which you start to see substantial decline in reaction time is much older than mid-20s. Okay, so even if there's no direct scientific explanation about cognitive decline after teenage years, that doesn't answer the question about why the professional gaming demographic skews so young. That's because the answers are two obnoxiously obvious, yet constantly overlooked reasons: time availability and social pressure. I know, these things are not as concrete as the studies and data on reaction times, but they easily have the most impact on skill level as a player gets older. Time availability is the easiest one to explain. Continuing with the traditional athlete comparison, all professional athletes spend thousands of hours in training and games to achieve their level of performance. Esports professionals are no different. Hell, in most cases, I'd argue that esports professionals actually spend more time practicing and playing their respective games than traditional athletes. You have these people in gaming houses playing for 12 to 14 hours a day. They're scrimmaging, they're training, they're doing drills for over 15 hours a day. And when they're not playing, they're still surrounded by their coworkers, essentially their employers, their managerial staff. There isn't really any opportunity for them to remove themselves from that space. It's just constant. Now, in order to log that many hours in the metaphorical digital batting cage, you actually need that many hours of available playtime, and no other demographic can compete with available playtime than young adults from middle school to college ages. Simply put, they just have more time to play and subsequently improve at a more significant rate. I mean, let's be honest, for a regular 12-year-old looking to traverse the path towards becoming a professional gamer, the only real roadblocks that prevent available time are menial responsibilities. Things like doing homework, unloading the dishwasher, even cleaning their room. And if you're discovered early enough, you get to maximize that time even more, just like those young esports pros living in gaming houses. It's when you start transitioning into adulthood that those obligations become more serious. Paying rent, making enough money for necessities, even starting a new family. When you're a 20-year-old, you can be all in games 24/7 and be super happy, right? But when you're in your 30s, 40s, you've got more real life responsibilities. You may have a family, you may have a kid, you may have stuff going on in your life. I still love games, I still play games, but it's not a priority for me. Shockingly enough, that transition to adulthood and shift of priorities usually starts right around the same age that the average esports professional retires, which leads me to my next point: social pressure. In general, there's a much different stigma around teenagers playing video games for 12 to 14 hours a day as opposed to a 25-year-old doing the same. It's simply not as accepted for the latter to commit that much time to what is often considered a fruitless pursuit. So that example comment from the beginning of the video, it holds a bit of truth. The expectations placed on youth, typically from friends and family, don't really have much of an impact until you hit your early 20s. At around that point, the expectations do the same transition from menial to serious. You need to be doing something more valuable with your time. You're still playing that game? Grow up. You should really find a more mature hobby. I mean, you seem like a loser gaming so much. And with those kinds of pressures breathing down the back of your neck, good luck maintaining the same available playtime that you had when you were younger, which means you can forget about being competitive against the teenagers who don't have to deal with those same expectations yet. So that's it then. I have way more important things to focus on, and to be honest, games aren't fun unless I can be really good at them. So I guess I am objectively too old for video games. Hold up, not quite. Despite what we just covered, the conclusion I came to is actually the opposite. I don't believe you can ever be too old for video games. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, we literally just walked through all the reasons why that's not true. We haven't talked about the most important findings yet. I saved those for last, with the first one being something called the nocebo effect. It's essentially the opposite of the well-known placebo effect. Instead of convincing yourself that something positive is occurring without cause, you're likely doing the same, but with a negative impact. A nocebo effect, where subjects believe in negative expectations to the point that they become reality. The inaccurate belief that players peak in their early 20s, despite the lack of actual medical research, thus becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Our brains are highly suggestible, so if you have multiple generations of players who genuinely believe that they're going to slow down when they hit 25, they will slow down when they hit 25. It's not going to be a matter that their brains can't process fast enough anymore. It's going to be a perception thing. They're going to filter everything they observe through that lens of, I am starting to slow down because I am old. Fine, even if I admit that all this cognitive decline is just in my head, I still can't enjoy the games like I used to because I'm getting stomped in every lobby. And honestly, if I can't be at least above average in skill level, what's the point? It's not fun to try anymore. The point is that you have a much different perspective now than you did during your younger years. Your brain and personality have matured into their adult forms. With that evolution comes a change in priorities in your life. For gamers like myself, it can sometimes take a little while to start de-relying on what's known as achievement by proxy. Here's the gist of what it is and why it occurs. When you're younger, you care a lot more about what other people think of you. Naturally, you want to be perceived as best as possible. So when you bring that desire into a competitive game environment with millions of players to perceive you and compare your self-worth against, what results is a heightened emphasis on things like in-game stats. Because in games, the only separation between you and another player is defined by stone-cold numbers. Kill-death ratio, competitive ranks in ELO, how many hours you've played, which means the easiest way to feel cooler, better, and more important is by being better at the game than others. But outside of the game, those stats mean nothing, and that becomes more apparent as you progress into adulthood. Because you're more aware of how in-game stats aren't significant in the real world, you naturally start deprioritizing gaming as a whole, usually replacing it with the pursuit of things like money or a new car and a better job. Your stats and rank used to be meaningful achievements. Now, because gaming isn't as significant in your life as it used to be, those achievements lose importance too. And if you heavily relied on them to feel important as an individual, it can be extremely difficult to adjust. It can even lead you to question if you should just quit because you're too old for video games. Which brings us to the final, most important point of the video. Gaming was never about the stats. It was never even about being the best. You can call me cringe, but it's always been about sharing experiences. Sharing joy, sadness, laughter, frustration. That's what makes gaming so special. For every tryhard that sweated in COD lobbies and only seemed to care about winning, there was always a friend who they were proud to share their achievements with. At the end of the day, that connection is why they play. That connection is why we play. But yes, young gamers do have the competitive advantage. Their cognitive abilities are slightly better, they have significantly more time to play, and they have fewer social pressures preventing them from playing. And in video games, the meta will always favor young players who can spend the time hyper-training themselves. Except these advantages and the idolization of in-game stats also create an unrealistic standard. It's like when an actor gets cast in the big new superhero movie. They end up getting insanely jacked and create this unrealistic example of peak fitness, when, in reality, they can only achieve that physique because they're getting paid millions to work out and have a team of dietitians and trainers that are optimizing their daily routine. But the more seasoned players know better. They know that gaming is more rewarding because they don't care about stats or skill level. Because in the real world, these things don't matter. Even when they are getting stomped on by a bunch of 13-year-olds, it just makes winning that much more enjoyable. So no, you can never be too old for video games, because at their core, video games are simply about shared human experiences, and those, my friend, last a lifetime. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this, and leave a comment giving your take on it. Do you think you'll ever be too old to play video games? Thanks for watching, and see you next time.